Okay, so I read a story, probably not true, about a group of frogs. They were traveling through the woods one day when two of them fell into a big, deep ditch. Now, all the other frogs gathered around the pit and were amazed of how deep it was. And the voices from above the deep ditch shouted down, "You are as good as dead." The two frogs ignored the comments and tried to jump out of the pit. The other frogs kept telling them to stop, that it was mission impossible. Finally, one of the frogs paid attention to that voice, gave up. She fell deeper into the ditch and died. The other frog continued to jump as hard as he could. Once again, the crowd yelled at her, trying to stop her useless attempts. But she began to bounce, and she bounced harder, and she bounced harder, and she finally made it out. And the crowd of frogs asked her, "Did you not hear us?" And the newly freed frog said, "I have hearing problems. I thought you were encouraging me to jump out of the hole this entire time." Voices. Our voice from within shapes one's character and capacity, brings clarity and confidence. And our theme this morning is to lift up our voice. Lift up your voice. And we heard two powerful stories. One I am very familiar with, but the other, and if the truth be told, I can't recall ever reading the stories. The story about the daughters of Zelophehad. It tells about 5 women who came before Moses to voice their demand that their family land be given to them. Their daughters are bold and make no excuse for their firmness of their voice and the demand for justice. Apparently, the women know the law and they know their history. They trust and use their voice to state the fact that their father was never involved in Korach's rebellion against Moses and Aaron. And then they use that fact as evidence to support his claim and their claim to the land. Because they are aware that the continuity of their family name depends on their inheritance. And they realize that the current law is wrong. It does not take into account the circumstances of a man without sons. And they possess the wisdom to recognize and the strength to voice this mistake or omission in God's law, because they know God's law is to be just. And they show no hesitation in voicing the unfair nature of the present situation and the complete confidence of supporting their claims with valid and compelling arguments. So the legacy of Zelophehad's daughters begin when they lift up their voice, because there is nothing more sacred than to act for what you believe is worthy and just. And then there's the Canaanite woman whose voice was loud, obnoxious. She shouts, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by the demon." She is obviously neither polite, nor is her voice timid. She showed no respect for the difference between herself and Jesus, between Jew and non-Jew, between male and female. She did not observe the lines of courtesy and custom because she was determined to get Jesus' attention. Her voice was loud, and which made things uncomfortable, almost embarrassing, you could imagine. For the sake of her demented daughter, the woman was willing to make herself a public nuisance. maybe she just knew more about the Israelites' God than they did. Because from her shouting and demanding voice, she knelt before Jesus with a plea from her heart. The legacy of the Canaanite woman begins when she lifted up her voice because she knew there was nothing more sacred than to act for what you believe is worthy and just. Both of these stories teach us to hold life as precious and to move from one place that others have given or a place that we have decided to keep because it feels safe and go toward the holy. But to do that, we have to lift up our voice. So that's the theme for this morning, trusting, lifting up your voice. Now, and for some of us, that voice is problematic. We have a hard time recognizing or understanding or believing in our innate value and worth. Sometimes we just find it easier to accept the negative, self-rejecting messages learned in our history of old. Others of us do not do things to prove ourselves or compare the choices we made to those made by others, and we minimize and deny our needs. There are folks I know who are unable and unwilling to recognize or challenge their self-sabotaging or self-destructive behaviors and cannot find their voice. I know it's part of what we default to, the other. Because somewhere in our brain, we need to be other validated. That's the kind of world we live in, where we dismiss our voice because we are more interested in getting each other's approval. We dismiss our voice because we don't want to create a Canaanite scene. We dismiss our own voice because nobody likes a know-it-all. At Bill Green's memorial service, I read one of his old reflections from the Pine Lines, and he wrote, "After I had done enough marriage and family therapy to qualify as a seasoned veteran, folks began to inquire about what issues came up most often in the work as troublesome and a deterrent to a healthy and happy relationship. And they were surprised when I responded, low self-worth or low self-esteem. Because, see, that critic always lingers within. That rigid and harsh voice of what is proper, the accuser always looking out for our erring ways, the guilt tripper nagging one about the wrongs you have done and telling us to feel bad, very bad. The shamer that tells us there's something fundamentally wrong, defective, bad, or shameful about us. The rejected that tells us you're not worthy to be accepted. You cannot affirm your voice when you live as one not worthy. There's an old Cherokee story about a grandfather and his grandson. And he told his grandson, "My son, there is a battle between two wolves inside us all. One is evil, it is anger, it's jealousy, it's greed, it's resentful, it's inferiority, it's lies and ego. The other is good. It's joy and peace and hope and humility and kindness, empathy and truth." The boy thought for a long time and asked the grandfather, "Grandfather, which wolf wins?" And the old man quietly replied, "The one that you feed." Got a little clip here that I want to show right now. Can we do that? Michael, you got it?
I can be a shark. Now my whole house is great. I can do anything good. I like my school. I like anything. I like my dad. I like my cousin. cousins. I like my aunts. I like my Allisons. I like my moms. I like my sisters. I like my dad. I like my hair. I like my haircuts. I like my pajamas. I like my stuff. I like my rooms. I like my whole house. My whole house is great. I can do anything good. Yeah. I can do anything good. Better than anyone. Better than anyone.
The wolf that wins is the one you feed. Mila, Noah, Hagla, Milcah, Tirzah, the Canaanite woman, encourage us to use our voice, to feed our voices. And owning our voice doesn't make you loud, argumentative, or obnoxious. Don't miss the point, because that's what they want you to believe. Owning your voice does not make you wrong or unreliable. Don't let the critics linger within. Owning your voice doesn't make you sound stupid. You don't have to accept that reaction. Your voice may be heard. And speaking the truth in love is not always soothing, but you own your voice. You articulate what you have to say, and hear this. You have something to say. And owning your voice is really the act of trust, trusting yourself, trusting that you have been created in the image of God. And no matter what critics with voice within may be shouting at you, God values you and who you are becoming. So just own that still small voice with the power to transform you, your families, this community and country. These women encourage us to use our voice to speak up. To say it out loud, what you know to be true. That God loves us. It's to raise our voices to challenge injustice and unfair laws and the sexist and racist tradition. It is to engage in the work of justice, which changes lives and relationships and even systems that keep people hidden or hindered, bent over from the privilege or the entitlement of the rich and the famous. All are valued as God's beloved, and that can never be taken away. To own your voice is to speak up like the Canaanite woman who literally talked into the authoritative figure of Jesus, who believes he has all the answers, and says, you might have missed the point. Expressing that you are God's beloved is to own your voice. It is to make testimony that you have been created in the image of God. It is to share the good news that Christ has come to bring life abundant and eternal, and to shout that nothing in all of creation can separate you from God's love. Owning your voice entails putting yourself at the center of discernment, because God does not desire us to defer to the powers and principalities of this world, but rather discern what is the more excellent way. So to own your voice is to speak, because to speak without listening creates barriers that result in confusion and divisiveness. So simply say it out loud. Own your voice, and you will follow Jesus and be more Christ-like today and tomorrow and in all the days ahead. May God bless you richly, and say it out loud. You belong, and nothing in all of creation can separate you from God's love.